Hello, beauties. Hope you're doing fabulous. Today, I'm going to reveal and swatch my version and my dupe of a New Moon palette from Colourpop. This is, of course, a collaboration with the Twilight series and the second story in that series. If you want to see me swatch and reveal these shades, go ahead and give a thumbs up and let's get started. As always, we're going to go left to right, top to bottom. I'm going to swatch every single shade. And as you can see, we have some extra shades here that I will suggest if you don't have the original shade that I propose or if you just want alternatives. To dupe our first shade, Mood Control, I chose Halo from the Series 2 Iridescent Multichromes collection of Cliona. Mood control to me essentially means something that needs to show variety of moods. So although the choice from the palette is a solid shimmer, or at least looks like a solid shimmer, I picked a multichrome. Of course, mood control is something that Jasper does, while I expected the New Moon palette to be a bit more about Jacob, so I kind of felt this shade a little bit out of place. Another reason for picking Halo is that the shifts in this shade, going all the way from reddish bronze all the way to teal, goes with all the shades that are in the original palette and also all the shades that I picked for my dupe. And as you can see, this is a gorgeous, gorgeous multichrome, going everything from a very light teal there and gold to a beautiful reddish bronzy shade over there. And the bronze and gold effects come out in the shade. Unfortunately, I don't have the best of cameras. There's a lot of sparkliness going on away from direct light. I'm investing in a better camera. Stay tuned. For the second shade in the palette called Marry Me, I picked Mellow Yellow from Sydney Grace. Now, Mellow Yellow is a light pastel yellow and significantly lighter than the shade in the palette. This was by choice. Again, this is my version of the palette, depending on the shades that looked good on me. And one issue I had with this palette, and the issue I have with a lot of palettes out there, is that they don't have enough light matte shades, which is why I picked a lighter shade than what was in the palette. And this shade goes with a lot of other shades in the palette also. Next shade in the palette called Wolf Pack. I have three options. Now, from the swatches on Colourpop website, this shade looks like it has a red base with a gold shift. So I think the center shade that I've picked here is the most representative. And I actually love that synergy. I'm going to tell you the name and you're going to know why. But let's go through some of my picks. This one is Grasshopper from Pretties for Your Face. And I love using extreme shifts and deep shades. You all know me. And that is why this shade makes sense. It's essentially a deeper version of what is in the palette, at least, again, from the swatches. It would be impossible for me to know what's in the palette. I don't own the palette. But from the swatches, and yes, we know those swatches are enhanced. And this shade, which I think is probably the closest to what's in the palette, is called Hawl at the Moon. Yes, beauties. From Looxi Beauty. And you know what? I kind of needed to use this shade because of the name. So here we are. And then if none of those is what you like, I picked another kind of extreme gold to green one. This one is Ochre from the Deep Iridescent Multichromes collection of Cliona. I don't know if I mentioned that this shade is called Wolf Pack, which is exactly why that middle shade name is so representative. And as I said, it looks most like this shade from the swatches. But then again, you also have Ochre from Cliona, which does have a reddish base. I don't know if you can see. You can see a little bit of that red base at the end there. But the shade that I chose to pick for my version of the palette is the top one, which goes a deep purple to green. This is a beautiful, beautiful shade. I wanted to step a little bit out of just having yet another neutral palette, which is why I wanted to introduce a bit more deeper greens also in the palette. And of course, these options away from direct light. And these shades, all three, are super, super sparkly. For the shade Alice, I picked Stilleto from Looxi Beauty. This is actually one of their highlighters, but I chose it as an eyeshadow. I couldn't quite understand whether it was Alice that had gold to pink shift or whether it was Trade Secrets. So it's very confusing from the Colourpop swatches because in the main photo of the palette, Trade Secret looks like it's supposed to be deeper than Alice, but then in the swatches on the side of the palette, the one with the pink shift looks to be the deeper shade. So I imagine then that would mean that it's Trade Secret that has the pink shift. But then in the other swatch photo on the side, Alice looks like it's the one with the pink shift. Anyway, when I get to Trade Secrets, I will show you some options with the gold to pink shift, and you can choose whichever you want to pick for Alice, whichever you want to pick for Trade Secrets. Stilleto is a gorgeous shimmer. If you want to overanalyze it, you can see more than one shade in it, but I don't think it was intended or sold as even a duochrome. So I would just say this is a monochrome shimmer, and it's gorgeous. It's one of those beautiful ones that are ideal for the inner corner and for brightening up any part of your eyeshadow look. And you know, Alice as a character is supposed to be super fun and bubbly, and I wanted to do her justice by representing her with a beautiful bright gold shimmer. For senior year, I picked Straw or Slumkowi from Glam Shop. And I also want to mention senior year, like, did that really need a color of its own? I kind of don't think so. I thought That's a Wolf thing had to be a shade, and they should have just had that shade instead. If you don't have this beautiful yellow shade from Glam Shop, there are other options you can choose from Sydney Grace. For the shade You're Sorta Beautiful, I picked Astrea from Devinah. This used to be from their Fantasia palette that they're now offering as separate singles, thankfully, so you can get your hands on it if you don't have it. But beauties, don't go buy it just to dupe this palette. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous blush coral matte. No single that I have looked more appropriate than Scandal from Glam Shop to represent adrenaline in this palette. And I definitely think this is a great, great choice of shade to represent adrenaline. It kind of makes my blood boil. This is a beautiful, hyper shimmery marble shade that swatches into a beautiful vibrant orange that looks like it has gold sparkles throughout. As I said, no other shade I own would have represented adrenaline more than this. I didn't quite understand why this next shade, Bloodsucker, in the palette is a cool toned. I mean, blood is more warm red than cool red. Also, blood generally reminds us of warm-blooded creatures, not cool-blooded creatures, obviously. And blood is part of the reason our body is warm. So a warmer toned shade made more sense to me, and that's why I picked warmer shades. Here are our two options. We have Lost Princess from Sydney Grace, and if you don't like that, you can choose Spiked from Terramoons. Both of these shades are shimmer, and Spiked has a warm tone and a cooler tone from some angles, but neither of these shades is as cool toned as what you see in the palette. Spiked might have been advertised as a duochrome. It's kind of hard to catch the different shifts though. To dupe this next shade, which honestly looks like a regular bronze shimmer. I picked Moth to a Flame, which is actually a gorgeous, gorgeous, not just a bland shimmer shade, and you're going to see some of the intricacies of this shade in a minute, from Looxi Beauty. This shade looks like it has a reddish base or reddish shift. It actually doesn't look as much of a base as it looks like it's just a shift of the shade going into gold. But then the gold isn't just a bland gold, and hopefully the camera captures that it has a very interesting green hue. Yeah, it's a very unique shade, and I thought, with all the gold and the reds and the green shifts in this palette, this shade would totally go. The shade also has a very interesting bronze shift at this angle. So sad that Looxi is not available at the moment. As promised, for this next shade, Trade Secrets, which is the secrets between wolf packs, we have two options. Both have a gold to pink shift. I have a video of my singles that have a yellow to pink shift. I'll tag it for you all. You can check that out for more options. These two looked very similar to what Colourpop had in the palette. First option is Epigram from Glam Shop, and second option is Shimmy from Looxi. In addition to the pink shift, Shimmy also has a light blue shift, but here are the two shades. I think Epigram is a closer representative of the shade in the palette, but as I said, you do you. I think either of these shades is a good shade for Alice. Alice being a gifted, multi-dimensional, very bubbly personality. Both of these shades would go for her. To do paper cut, of course, we needed a shade that could represent blood. The shade in the palette is a very, very deep reddish brown. I wish I had a shade like that. Like, that's one of those shades that I would buy this palette just for that one shade. But unfortunately, I don't have a shade like that. If you know a single that can be a dupe for that shade, please write the name in the comments below, because I would love to have that single. But in the absence of that, I picked two possibilities. The first one, which is the one that I picked in my palette, is Copacetic's Eternally Yours. And the second option, if you want something a little bit more reddish, now this one is cool tone, so not so much of a blood shade, is from the Berry Icy palette from Simply Posh. Again, remember, beauties, the shade swatches in reality are usually deeper than what you see on camera, particularly for matte shades. And for our next shade, October, November, December, which are 3 months when Edward is gone and Bella is just depressed, we have a beautiful, beautiful deep brown shade with a hint of purple. And I picked the closest shade to that I had in my collection, although mine doesn't look as purple. And this is Eggplant from Glam Shop. And the swatch of Eggplant, when I look at it, not through the camera lens, looks very similar to the swatch that I see in the photos of the palette. The next shade in the palette is a matte black, and you all know that I rarely would actually use a matte black in my dupes because I make these dupes to use them myself, and I just don't use matte black, so it's just going to be an unused shade. This is one alternative that I recommend. I think the shifts go very, very well with the palette, and it is a very deep shade that goes to black. Now, it's not exactly matte, and the one that I'm showing you is Midnight Sun from Devinah. Now, if you don't have Midnight Sun from Devinah, in my dupe of Deep Sea Treasures palette, I talk about a few different dupes of this shade and I swatch them. I'll tag that video for you all. If you don't have this shade, you can check that out. As you can see, this one goes black to cool toned red to warm toned red to yellow, and even a little bit of green at the very end. Overall, a gorgeous, gorgeous shade. Fantastic fit for this palette. Although I couldn't quite understand why Soul Reader had to be this shade. I mean, are you saying your soul is black? Yeah, the whole just having matte black for Soul Reader was just not making sense. Again, it felt like Colourpop is just randomly picking shades that would go instead of really thinking about it. Whereas now picking a multichrome instead can show a little bit of a range of capabilities, right? If we're talking about Edward and his ability to read people's soul. For the next shade in the palette, Soulless Monster, Colourpop picked a deeper green shimmer, and I couldn't quite understand that. Why would a soulless monster, which I would think of like a ghost, be a deep green shade, which is a positive sort of a connotation? Like green is a good color. It inspires tranquility and relaxation, not fear. So it just kind of didn't make sense. For it, I picked a lighter shade that is very sparkly because this shade is supposed to represent Edward, because that is how Edward is referred in the movie by Arrow. And the shade that I picked is from the Glistening Creatures bundle. It's Canary from Glaminatrix. A beautiful and super sparkly shade, obviously great for representing vampires because they're very sparkly. And I literally only picked green because the original shade was green and it had to go with the other shades in the palette. And I didn't want to be too far from what Colourpop had done. Before I show you all my options for the last shade, beauties, go ahead and write to me in the comments below. Were you Team Edward or Team Jacob? Okay, so this one is supposed to be a very deep, cool-toned brown, and the name of this shade is Your Everything. I felt that we had enough browns, particularly deep shades in this palette, which is why I picked a lighter cool-toned shade. And I tried to pick a shade that is literally a lighter version of what Colourpop picked. And the first option here is Ivy League, which is one of my favorite shades from Sydney Grace. If you don't have that, you can do a little bit warmer toned. And this one is Spiced Lemon from Looxi Beauty. Obviously, if you have this shade, and if you don't have that and want to be even deeper, this is more similar, or I should say most similar of the three shades to the shade that's in the palette. But of course, in terms of depth, and this one is Katatsu from Shroud Cosmetics. And you can see here how these shades differ, and pick whichever one you think makes sense in this spot of the palette. Beauties, don't forget a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. Also, don't forget to let me know in the comments below, were you Team Jacob or Team Edward? Also, if you enjoy these duping videos, I have a whole playlist duping the most popular palettes. If you have any recommendations of palettes I should dupe, write the name of the palette in the comments below. You can also check out my duping playlist that's going to be recommended to you on the screen about now. I love you all. Have an awesome day, and until next time, bye!